What is going on, Internet? Eric Banholt's back again with another e-commerce conversations. I hope all is well on the other side of the Internet. On the other side of the Internet for me, Bryan. Long time no
Eric,
see.
long time no see. Yeah, we were just comparing notes. It's been 5 years.
5 years, a half a decade.
Yeah,
We're
half
still
a
in the
decade. Feels
game.
like still here. Yeah, it's been 30 years for me in commerce. Not going anywhere. Not going anywhere quick.
30 years in commerce?
Yeah,
How
97.
does that even happen? You
I
look like
wrote my-
you're 35 years old.
Well, I have a good camera. I've invested. It does a good job of hiding the gray. I'm not bearded today because if I were bearded, and I'm sorry that I'm not for you, it would be very gray. It would give away my age. But yeah, I love this industry. It sort of keeps me young. But I wrote my first commerce app in 97, like a shopping cart storefront, super long time ago.
Well, for those who didn't catch our episode 5 years ago, who the heck are you and what the heck do you do?
Yeah, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Don't you remember that episode? It's the number one episode on your podcast. Yeah, where do you want to start? I gave it away. I've been in commerce for a long time. It was awesome to join your pod 5 years ago. Maybe we can make this an every 5-year occurrence. My name is Bryan. I'm the founder and CEO of Chord Commerce. As I was 5 years ago when we chatted, Eric. Different company though, and totally different product. But I've been sort of chasing this idea for a really long time. This idea of, and I think about my career started as a sort of like someone who was hacking on commerce technology in the late 90s and parlayed that experience into running an agency at a Montreal, Canada, where I'm originally from for nearly 20 years, and an agency that made its mark working with companies and brands and retailers who wanted to get closer to their customers through digital channels. And so early days, that was catalog commerce. You couldn't even buy on most sites. Eventually that became e-commerce. And then I think back to, we're just talking about 5 years ago, like early 2010s, direct to consumer was becoming a thing. And the company that I was working at and running, we'd really created a name for ourselves and working with some of those early movers in direct to consumer. I made the jump from agency and hacker to sort of in-house technologist when I joined one of those companies that we had helped to launch, which was Glossier. Really one of the sort of the seminal names in the early D2C movement. Spent 5 years there, left in 2019, and threw my hat into the brand building and launching ring when my co-founder, Henry Davis, and I created a company called Arfa. And it was at Arfa where we started to work on some of the technology that today underpins Chord, which is, fast forward to 2026, I can't even believe it. We're a data platform and an agentic layer for brands that are trying to do that very same thing that I've been working on my whole career, using their first-party data, using their digital channels to get closer to their customers and deliver magical experiences.
There's a lot to unpeel with that.
Yes.
So I appreciate the very thorough intro. And I think it's interesting that you get such a wide perspective of this industry from kind of the projects you've embraced and the projects you've decided to, we call them archive them or parking lot them. Move beyond. Glossier is such a, as you said, like iconic brand in the D2C space. It's such an innovative company. Everybody kind of, I want to say everybody, but I'm an admirer of what they built, especially with the blogging in the early days into the gloss, and then the technology that you guys implemented onto the platform. But you dipped your toes in the water of brand building a little bit with Hickey and State of Menopause. How much of, I kind of want to get your thoughts on like, how much of building a brand is like a little bit of just like serendipity, for lack of better terms, just the right product with the right audience at the right time.
Yeah, it's a really good question because we read or we see the headlines sometimes like a brand that sort of appears out of nowhere or what seems like it's come out of nowhere and suddenly they've got this amazing following. A lot of times when you meet the people behind those brands, like it hasn't just come out of nowhere. Maybe they've been working away on it for years and trying to create that following or create that community. There are obviously some success stories that feel a little bit more like arbitrage where the product that you eventually get isn't really a fantastic product and you're probably not going to be a lifelong customer. Maybe I was inspired by you, but I started a little podcast maybe about a year ago. And the whole premise is that I like to meet with operators behind what I call iconic or next to be iconic brands and really sort of like unpack the quote unquote secrets, but there are no secrets. You have to meet customers where they are, treat them really well, and like still fundamentally like deliver an amazing product to them, an amazing experience. And so I don't think there's anything magic. Like you've got to figure out what customers are looking for. I think they want to be led a lot of times. Like you're not just going to crowdsource ideas and then go to a factory and build that for them. There's got to be something. There's got to be a magic, I think, to why you want to put a brand on your body or put a product that they're giving to you in their body. Like there's a certain amount of trust that they're going to give to you, and I think that trust has to be earned. I don't think it can just be lightning in a bottle. I think if you do all of that work, you can absolutely catch lightning in a bottle where you've got those early cohort of customers that are just so excited to tell their entire network about you, and in a way that wasn't maybe possible 10 or 15 years ago. Like the rate at which you can grow and amplify that message, I think is really exciting. But the fundamentals of building a great brand and building a great product are still what they've always been. And we talk an awful lot these days about agents running around and making purchases. Like, I don't know about you, but like I love meeting products in person and like walking into a store and shopping and touching and feeling things. And I just don't think that's going to disappear anytime soon.
So you transition from kind of like building this family of brands to a headless, which is
Yep.
not a term I've actually heard it
In a
probably
while.
since the last time we
Yeah.
chatted. It was definitely, there was a little bit of buzz around it, but as you said before we hit record, like it didn't have that same kind of like sticking power to it.
Yeah. It was
And
too hard.
yeah, like walk me through like why the market in the ecom space didn't really move towards like a headless solution. Was it just too confusing for operators? What do you think that was?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. This was around 2020. 2019, 2020 was when this whole move towards either the mock stack, composable commerce, or headless commerce sort of became a thing. And it was really originally designed to address some of the issues that we're seeing on the internet. Pages were taking a really long time to load. Performance really mattered. Obviously, like more and more of the sessions that we are seeing were mobile sessions. So that speed to deliver the digital product to your customer mattered more than ever. And headless, or in a lot of times these front ends were statically generated, was a great way to deliver better speed to your customer, deliver sort of a better experience. It also, if you had a smart engineering team, afforded you as a brand the complete flexibility to deliver whatever experience you wanted. It wasn't this idea that the alternative at the time was to use the same template that everyone else was using. I think like the language I used to use way back then was like the sea of sameness. So if you want to be a brand and you want to really stand out, but your website looks identical to everyone else's, like, well, you're not really endearing yourself to your customer. So how do you deliver on speed? How do you deliver on customization and flexibility? Headless promised to solve that. The problem was that it required you to maintain an awful lot of infrastructure. So if your product team wanted to make a change, you had to go through engineering. And some people really got that right. More often than not, it just proved to be too complicated. And so I think the pendulum honestly swung a little bit too far, where anyone who wanted to embrace this technology was sort of forced to become a technology company and sort of forgot why they existed in the first place, was to be a brand and to get connected with their customers. And I'll give Shopify here a bunch of credit. They have made their product significantly better. Like the speed issues, some of the complications we were used to see on the front end, like all of that went away. The amount of options you have from a template point of view are more robust than ever before. So they solved it a different way, while allowing brands to be great at what they originally intended to be great at, which was product and customer experience, and not necessarily differentiating themselves with technology. Ironically, now with Claude writing most of our code, I think headless could make it. You could ultimately get back there, but I don't see that emerging anytime soon.
It is, real interesting dynamic. I'll kind of look back on, my early days, and the very first e-commerce store I built was on Magento, and I think it crashed about 30 days later.
Makes
And
sense. You did well,
I
30 days.
yeah, well, I wasn't selling anything, no one was visiting the website. But I moved on to different projects, and then eventually I came back to e-commerce. And I remember thinking, is like, I as much as I love technology, and I'm excited for it and I think it's interesting, I don't want all my time spent on infrastructure. Like, I
Yeah.
want my time spent thinking about how I can serve my customers to the best of my abilities, and having technology that, is, for lack of better terms, is like, you just don't have to think about it. It requires very little, like, brain resources, is,
Hmm.
in my opinion, the best option. And then just figuring out how to work within that and get your self to 90% or 95% of your vision, and just be okay with the fact that going after that 5% is not really worth, for the majority of people, that customization or
Yeah.
those needs, especially now, like, by dragging your feet. And as you mentioned, like with AI and coding, is like, you can almost output anything that you want by yourself by just talking to a friggin' robot. It's
Yeah.
it's absolutely bonkers, the world we live in. So, how long into Headless did you get the feeling that, like, this was not the direction? And, like, talk to me about the strategy behind deciding not to just, like, close Chord, but to pivot again
Yeah.
to a different direction that you're going.
Yeah. I'm addicted to commerce. I'm addicted to brand, and so and we had a number of customers that had thrown a ton of support behind us, and so we didn't want to go anywhere. We had really earned the right to be building alongside of them, and some really sort of like forward thinking brands. The saving grace for Chord was that we were never just a headless commerce company. We knew early on that the move towards something that was composable or headless was going to create a mountain of data issues. Suddenly, you were going to be using a number of different point solutions, and your data was going to live across a number of different platforms. So somewhat like ambitiously, we tried to be a headless commerce platform and a data platform at the same time. And I'm happy we did, even though it was a little bit crazy. Those are two companies in one. But increasingly, the companies that we were meeting and we were showing the platform to, they would kept pointing to the data platform, and they'd said, like, that's interesting. Can I just use that? And initially, we were too precious about how the two work together, and we said no. In order to get access to the data platform, it requires you to fully replatform, which, even as those words are coming out of my mouth today, that's insane. In 2022 and 2023, when I was saying no to those opportunities, was exactly the time that no commerce company could afford a replatform. Like, it was just, what are you actually proposing to us? Um, I got tired of hearing no, and so we were like, how can we say yes? And so we decided to start divesting, if you will, or moving our focus away from being really dogmatic about headless as being the solution, and really leaning into just being platform agnostic. You don't have to use Chord for our front end or for our order management system. If you're on Shopify, we'd love to have your business. If you're on Magento, great. We can help solve the data problems that maybe you're experiencing. And that really opened up the aperture for us to work with more brands that were seeing a similar problem, although not like customer facing, to their approach to data. Their data lived in a number of different places, and they weren't getting enough ROI on it. We kept hearing like data is the most important thing, but then your data lived everywhere. So that was a smart move, I think, for us. I think we got a little bit lucky, like right time, right place, because as Gen AI bursts onto the scene, it's even more important than ever to have your data in one place and accessible, not just for your teams, and wanting to democratize access to insights, but also to be able to take advantage of some of these frontier models and be able to leverage them for reasoning, be able to leverage them to be able to do more with less. And so our progress, sort of like penetration in the market, has accelerated since we've taken that data infrastructure that we've been building for years, and have pointed it squarely at being able to get the most out of the Gen AI era that we're in. And it's kind of funny, because when I said early on, this hypothesis was brands of the future weren't going to be full-fledged tech companies. They weren't going to have a 70-person technology team or raise hundreds of millions of dollars of VC. We can now deliver on that promise when you think about the agents you can hire to do an awful lot of the traditional roles. If you trust the data, if you have the right guardrails in place to ultimately be able to do that. So I think it's a truly exciting time to be building.
So, I'll be a self-admitted idiot when it comes to anything data related.
Yep.
So I kind of hire that stuff out. I'm the brand guy, I'm the vision guy, I'm the product guy, and then when it gets into data, it's just starts coming out as Greek letters. I hear terms thrown around like data warehouse,
Yep.
CDP. Are those, explain it to me like I'm an idiot because I am. Explain to me like what is the whole purpose of this and what kind of value is an operator going to get by, you know, basically consolidating their data into one source is how I interpret what you guys
Yeah.
are doing.
No, I mean, I think it's a really good question and a hard question to answer. Without just throwing around like terms that any data warehouse platform is going to sell to you. You know, you need a single source of truth. Like, okay, but why? You know, what am I going to get from doing that? I think early on, like when I was in New York and maybe like the early 2010s, and brands were rushing to put all their data in a data warehouse, used to talk to technology leaders and they'd say like, do you know how many rows of data I have or how many petabytes? And I'm like, I don't know. How many do you have? And like rattle off some number. I'm like, well, what are you doing with the data? And they'd be like, shoulder shrugging. I was like, well, congratulations on this liability that you've just accumulated that you now need to keep safe. Um, so it's not as simple as sort of saying you need a single source of truth and you have to buy a data warehouse and you have to buy a CDP. I think you need to have the use cases. You need to understand what it is you're trying to do with that data. And maybe it's to power an acquisition campaign. Maybe it's to understand who your best customers are. Maybe it's to understand what is the next product that you need to create. Maybe you just launched a product and you want to be able to see reviews and not just the number of 5 stars that you got. You want to be able to interpret some of the language that you're seeing in these reviews to really understand what's working. Maybe it's to look for insights like, geez, like our NPS score, when a customer orders these 2 products together, we never would have guessed, but it is exponentially higher than someone who orders the products individually. Maybe we should think about a bundle. I think the idea of having your data all in one place, number one, allows you to look at it quite holistically. It allows you to query it with these hypotheses and ideally find some of these insights. The difficulty, I think, if you don't do that, so let's say, for example, you're using Google Analytics, you're using Shopify, you're using Klaviyo, you're using something like Recharge for your subscriptions, and you're independently jumping into all of those different platforms to just look at their point of view on the small slice of data that they have. It's difficult to be able to look at all of that holistically. So that becomes the launching off point, I would say, for a brand to put their hand up and say, you know what, actually, I kind of think I need to bring all this data into one place as opposed to having it live in silos, albeit like really nice silos. Those are all really great platforms. But I want to have like this sort of consolidated point of view. We haven't even talked about AI yet, but I mean, the fact is, if you want to deploy agents that have access to all of that, those are some of those initial building blocks or infrastructure that you just have to put in place.
So you bring everything together. You have a single resource where you now have a full grasp of your entire customer experience, right?
Yep.
Whether or not they're, buying on XYZ platform or your own
Yeah.
.com or the emails they're getting, the text messages they're getting. Um, so when you build this out, I guess from your perspective, you're building Chord. How many of these integrations are kind of out of the box? I assume like just does everybody have like an API? Like how do
Yeah.
you get all the categories and all the data to work together where
Yeah.
basically like it's the same column
Good
and
question. It is mostly out of the box now. We've been working on it for years. We have decided to be purpose built for commerce. And I think that's an important distinction. There's an awful lot of like very good general purpose tools out there, be it the CDP layer or the data warehousing layer, but they're not opinionated about commerce. Like they don't understand your business the way that we do. So we don't have a connector for some obscure platform that a commerce operator would never sign up for. Like ours is like very surgical and purpose built for commerce. And we like to say that we've built this as operators for other operators. You know, I mean, let's be honest, I'm selling a platform, but I'm selling it to people whose roles I used to operate in, and I know firsthand, the challenges that they're up against. And, it's always a real source of pride when someone says like, yeah, that's how we would build it if we were building all of that in-house, but it doesn't make sense for us to do that. So we're happy to trust you and your team to go and do it.
what does it look like when you get in there? So you get in there, you sync everything together.
Yep.
Is it just, do you build your own dashboards? Do you guys have pre-made dashboards? Do you guys have like prompts for like what kind of questions you need to be asking?
Yeah, for someone that doesn't know data, you're asking all the right questions. Yeah, I mean, the answer is yes. You know, like although I will say we are seeing less and less usage around like dashboards and reporting. It's much more what you can imagine the paradigm becoming today, which is a chat window. You know, like, and what do I want to know about my data today? When you first get in there, though, it's not enough that we have all of your data connected. When specifically as it relates to AI, there's a lot of training that needs to happen. Honestly, like this is not a 5-minute thing, and then suddenly Chord's going to know everything about your business. Like I guarantee you, we're going to know how many orders you placed last week. But we won't know if you ran a promotion. We won't know if something extraordinary happened externally. Maybe there was some buzz on social. Maybe you change some business rules. Like we're going to ask you a series of questions explicitly, so we learn a little bit more about how you run your business. We're going to learn an awful lot implicitly just by the questions that you're asking and like the areas of interest. And then slowly but surely, the Chord starts to act like a member of your team. And it might say to you, "Hey, Eric, like here's some things that we noticed, and here's some recommendations that we would suggest that you take." So it starts, or we started when we first experimented with moving away from dashboards more into sort of like a natural language interface of having it just be very open-ended. But now we're starting to make it more opinionated based on, okay, we know you're in marketing, we know you're in merchandising, we know you're in ops. We're going to suggest some things for you. And then the more you work with it, it's like any tool, the more you put in, the more you're ultimately going to get out. We are going to be a little bit more forceful in terms of the insights or recommendations that we're going to bring forward to you.
Yeah, we just had a conversation this morning in our weekly meeting with our team. We're launching a new product this month, and I'll kind of maybe give an example of where Chord might have really helped us. Was like we're trying to figure out what would be the best day to launch this
Yeah.
product. You know, does it make sense to launch it after Memorial Day or before Memorial Day or on the weekend, or we have flexibility basically on when we could launch the product. And what I did is I just went back to the previous Mays and I just looked at
Yeah.
what days were the biggest days, knowing that we had done launches, sometimes like mid-May, sometimes late May, and knowing also that like there are different products and the data is from my perspective, like incredibly muddy. Like
Yeah.
I have no idea. Just I think it's like 10% gut feel,
Yeah.
and then 90% luck is what it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. I think for like branded commerce, like where you have that connection with your customer, like there's this infatuation with being totally data driven. Like I'm just going to do what the data tells me to do. I'm like, I don't think that's right. Like, how do you be data informed? Like, how can you ask those questions? Like, show me the last 5 Mays. Okay, what happened? Is this a predictable trend? Was there something else going on in the world at that time that may have affected this? Do we think there's going to be something going on in the world this weekend that we're going to be competing against? How have our customer acquisition costs been trending over the last like month or so? You can ask all these questions. You can get all that data, but then ultimately you've got to make the gut decision. Like, how can you be data informed? Like, okay, I feel like I've asked a bunch of questions. I probed into the data. I don't think it's perfect, but I think like we're going to launch on Thursday. And then you put all your resources around launching around Thursday. And then you remember those queries that you had. You remember the decision you made. You remember the results of that. And so a year from now, or 4 months from now, or 5 months from now, when you go to launch another product, you can bring that up. Like, the memory is there, the context exists, and there's an awful lot of conversation right now, like it's timely, memory versus context in the AI space, which is like, you want to talk about muddy, that is super muddy. But how do you have a system that remembers the right things and doesn't overload context and inevitably or accidentally cost you like suddenly hundreds of $1,000s to run and make those decisions for you? So I think you have to continue to trust your gut. Can you use tools to get you close to your data to make your gut smarter? For sure. But I don't ever want to propose a platform that removes the gut instinct of operators that know their brand and know their products and know their customers better than we ever will.
Yeah, I mean, I just think we've been running Beard Brand since 2012, and
Amazing.
like we've
Congrats.
had so many design changes, so many product launches, so many like viral videos go off. Is Chord able to import and handle basically like all of our social media content as well to get
Yeah.
perspective of like, when our YouTube views were popping and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah, there's limits to what those platforms are going to give away. There's limits to the social listening that we can do today. There are platforms that are great at that, but certainly we're going to bring in as much of that data as we can as context. Some of it is super reliable, and we're going to include that in the queries, and others we're going to build that into our confidence score. So much of what we are going to return as a recommendation to you is now like we show all of our reasoning, which is very important to our early design partners. They're like, we don't just give us an answer. We want to know how you got to the answer. We want to be able to adjust the reasoning, adjust the steps. And then we're going to give you a confidence score. And the confidence score is going to depend on where we're getting the data from, how much we've processed it, how much we've modeled it. And so it goes back to this. Maybe we should have this like diagram of like the confidence score needs to be like the gut feeling meter. How much of this, how confident are we in this recommendation? And, how much do you need to trust your gut? But yeah, I mean, the short answer is like, yeah, we bring in an awful lot of that. And I think the challenge when you're using AI now is like how much context is too much context, because it's very easy to overwhelm the models where they're just trying to give you an answer that looks reasonably right. And you see it sometimes, like if you ask it to write an email and you're like, that's a good email. And then you read it and you're like, wait a sec, I can't send that. But on the surface, it looked great. But when you're
Yeah.
talking about a launch and you're about to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars behind that launch, like you better be confident in the answer that you're getting. It can't just look good; it has to be good.
Well, that's kind of what I think about in particular is, a couple of years ago, you hear about how great AI is. I pull up Chat GPT and I'm like, all right, here's my spreadsheet. I need to do this kind of analysis. And they're like, all right, here you go. Here's what it said. And then I'm like, this is just made up stuff. Like you're just
Yeah,
pulling numbers out of a hat. How do you prevent that kind of
hallucination.
hallucinations
Yeah.
in AI when, in my opinion, especially from like a number perspective or like a financial reporting perspective, it's so vital to be accurate.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. This is the thing that keeps me up at night. It starts with we have built our platform on top of our data platform, and I back our data models like truly. Like you can audit everything, you can look at every single line in the database down to the decimal. Um, that makes it easier for us to be able to validate that it's right. We've also built an awful lot of infrastructure that is always critiquing the answers that we're providing, doing self-evaluation. I mentioned this, the sort of the confidence score. It's ultimately our job to make sure that we're as right as we possibly can be. And so part of what we call our context stack, and this was a big part of what we released last week, it's like a layer cake. It does an awful lot. Like part of it is the data foundation, like really trustworthy data to begin with. There's some domain knowledge and there's some institutional knowledge that are all sort of layers of this cake. The domain knowledge one is sort of interesting because we exclusively operate in commerce. If you ask a question about your conversion rate and you get back some number and you're like, is that accurate? We've already checked it. Like we know what domain you're in, we know what category you're in, we know that this is a number that is like sort of in the ballpark. If we think it's not in the ballpark, we're going to let you know. Chord is also going to let you know, like, we don't love this answer, and we've kicked off a longer running process to evaluate how we ultimately got there. So our goal is to not give you the fastest answer or the answer that looks right. Our goal is to make sure that 99 times out of 100 we're giving you the right answer, even if we can't deliver it immediately, which is a new part of what we're doing now. And sometimes the part that's a little bit taken for granted, like we're in this era right now. It's funny. I get dragged into these build versus buy conversations. Like I have my entire career. Should I build it? Should I buy it? And I've always said the right answer is buy then build. But it's if you're like an entrepreneur right now and you've got a small tech team, it is like very tempting to say like I want to go and build all of this stuff, and you can make all of this progress really quickly. But I want to encourage people to explore because it's really fun. It is totally addictive, but there's a cost associated with all of this. Like some of those hidden costs, how are you making sure that what you're building is right? How are you making sure that what you're building scales? How do you make sure that what you're building is safe and secure? All these things that we've hired platforms traditionally to help us with data governance and data security and compliance, like all of that stuff. You're like, well, I'm just building it myself. I don't need to worry about that. But actually, you do. You always have. It just, we can lose sight of that sometimes.
Yeah, I kind of want to dig into um, a little bit of what you were talking about earlier, the kind of the context you call the context
Yeah.
stack. Are you pulling in data from other similar companies and being able to compare, like, let's say, my repeat
Yeah.
order rate is XYZ%. This is what the industry is typically seeing. Is that the
Yeah.
kind of information you guys are providing?
Yeah, so we're pulling in that information, absolutely. We've also been accumulating it over the last 5 years, half decade that we have been building and seeing this data. And so you can opt in to sort of an anonymized data co-op within Chord so that we can accumulate that data to things like benchmarks and industry standards. But we're also pulling in that data as well so that we're able to, like, we never share personal information. Like, all of our tenants are completely isolated, but there is this domain knowledge layer that we've been able to build so that if you ask for best practices, you don't have to go to the public internet. Like, Chord has that. We've been accumulating that knowledge over, the last half decade.
I think that's from my perspective, you never know. Like, the grass is always greener, as we talked
Yep.
about earlier, and everybody's got these perfect unicorn businesses, and everything's always great. But sometimes you don't realize how great some of the things that you are doing is, and being able to get that reference from other companies to know, oh man, I have a very high reorder rate. Why is that higher? Or what is the real problem that I should
Yeah.
be working on? Like, this thing's
Yeah.
actually working pretty good. I should reallocate my resources and my focus onto fixing this. I don't think any company's ever going to line up perfectly with industry standards, but I do think it can really be like a exclamation point of notification or notification window into your
Yeah.
business.
Yeah. And I think, like, how can we deliver those results in as near real time as possible? There's like there might be something in current public events that are affecting conversion rates industry wide. And if you just go and ask, like, what is the benchmark for an open rate of an email, like, you're getting that in a moment in time. Like, it's not going to be reflected that quickly, but we have the opportunity to see that across the platform and to be able to sort of give you an opinion on what you're seeing. Um, Trends, essentially being able to report on trends. And I think that's one of the advantages of a platform having that domain expertise, if you will. The domain focus is being able to return some of those intangible benefits.
So when I go to your website, you don't have a prices section, which means
Nope.
it's probably a little bit more expensive than my company would be willing to pay for. What is your ideal customer? Like, at what size and what pain points are they going through where they're really going to find a lot of a lot of value from Cord?
Yeah, we just launched a new website last week. Like a classic story of, like, you never really like your website, especially when you spent 20 years building websites. But I think this one does a better job than the one we had before of explaining our story. You're right. We don't have a pricing page up. We do want our pricing to be pretty transparent. So there is a platform access fee. And with that, you get access to all of our data connectors, the unification layer, and then some amount of usage on top of what we call Chord AI. In terms of, like, the ideal customer, it is someone who is selling some of their products online. Doesn't mean that they're exclusively direct to consumer. They're probably selling across multiple channels, and they want to have their data live in one place. They want to be able to actually use AI that works in their business, in a way that they trust without having to go and build all the infrastructure themselves and worry about keeping it secure. Um, on the low end, that can be brands that are doing maybe $10 million of annual online GMV. On the high end, that can be a $1 billion brand, someone who's operating on a global scale. And we are lucky enough to have a handful of those on the platform. We have tried to make it as accessible as possible. It's not something that costs $100 a month. It normally starts around $2,000 a month, but you get an awful lot of infrastructure there. And so I think about it as, the cost that would be associated with trying to hire some of the roles that Chord is able to take on for you as an operator right away. And I think it's great value for money.
Well, I appreciate you being transparent there. And
Yeah, of course.
that's the curiosity that I think a lot of operators and owners and marketers have is out of the gate. And the friction points of having to book a demo to just, like, get a rough feel. It's like,
Yeah.
hey, these are the type of companies that are going to find the most value out of it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
appreciate
We're always
that.
trying to strike that balance. It's a hard thing Chord is not a 5-minute install. Like, we cannot learn everything we need to learn about your business in 5 minutes. We cannot bring in the amount of history that we need to be able to actually return value to you. So we're heavily invested in pilots right now. Like, we want people to get a sense of what a day in the life or a month in the life of on Chord would be like. We want you to get a sense of what it's like to work with us and the team that is going to help with implementation and with onboarding. We're not a point solution, we're a platform, which comes at the cost of, I can't just say, if you want to do a demo, here you're sort of on your own. We're always trying to find ways to make onboarding better and faster and to give people sort of like a look in, sort of a try before you buy. But it is a more considered purchase, and I'd be lying if I didn't say that.
No. Where can people check you out, follow you, find you, email you?
Yeah, we're chord.co. That's the easiest place to find us on the website. I'm not very active on the socials. See above my age. I am on LinkedIn though, and I try to do a great job of writing back to people who are curious and who write to me. And yeah, like I said, a selfish plug, I do have a little podcast, and I've had some great guests that are on that tell stories behind what it took to get their brands to that iconic status. And I absolutely love those conversations. So you can generally find me just about anywhere.
There you go. Bryan Mahoney, this has been another e-commerce conversations. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks so much, Eric. Thanks for having me back.
And keep on growing.